Lonely Duke bought a deaf girl sold by her drunk father, then realized she heard every word. The rain had been falling since morning, the kind of cold, steady rain that turned Bristol's cobblestones into dark mirrors and sent honest people indoors. But the crowd that gathered at the corner of Harbour Lane that Tuesday evening was not made up of honest people. They were dockworkers and gamblers, sellers of things that should not be sold, and men who watched other men's misfortune the way they watched a cockfight, with hungry, curious eyes. The carriage belonging to the Duke of Ashworth sat at the edge of the crowd, unable to move forward, because of the press of bodies blocking the narrow road. The Duke himself, Edmund Ashworth, 31 years old and widely known across 3 counties as the coldest, most disagreeable peer in England, peered out of his carriage window with the particular expression of a man who has just discovered something unpleasant on the bottom of his boot. "What is all this?" he asked his driver. "Can't rightly say, Your Grace. Looks like a sale of some kind." Edmund pulled his coat tighter, and stepped down from the carriage. He was tall enough to see over most of the crowd, with dark hair plastered flat by the rain and grey eyes that missed nothing. He had come to Bristol on business, his solicitor had documents that needed signing, and he had not planned to stop for anything. He had not planned for a great many things that would happen that evening. The man on the makeshift stage was red-faced and swaying. He wore a coat that had once been respectable and was now simply old, and he smelled, even at a distance, of cheap gin and something worse. He was holding a young woman by the wrist. She was perhaps 18 or 19, small and pale, with dark hair that the rain had plastered against her cheeks and neck. Her dress was plain brown wool, soaked through. She stood absolutely still on the stage, while the man waved his free arm at the watching crowd and bellowed in a voice thick with drink. "Broken goods, gentlemen, I won't lie to you. Deaf as a stone, this one. Deaf since birth, can't hear a word you say, can't hear a whistle, or a shout, or a cannon going off right beside her. Useless for a wife, useless for fine company, but strong enough in the arms and quick enough with a broom. She'll work without complaint, because she won't hear you complain, and she won't talk back because..." He paused to let the crowd laugh, and some of them did. "Because she doesn't know what's being said anyway." Edmund watched the girl on the stage. She was not looking at the crowd. She was looking at a point somewhere above their heads, her face perfectly calm, her jaw set with a quiet kind of dignity that seemed, to Edmund, entirely at odds with her situation. Her free hand was pressed flat against her thigh, as though she were holding herself very still by force of will. He thought about his aunt, Lady Harriet, who had arrived at Ashworth Manor 3 weeks ago with a list of suitable young ladies and the firm intention of seeing him engaged before the new year. He thought about the endless dinners, the simpering smiles, the conversations about weather and fashion, and absolutely nothing that mattered. He thought about how quiet his house had become since his parents died, and how loud it had become again the moment Harriet walked through the door. He did not think about what he was doing until he was already doing it. "I'll buy her," he said. The drunk man on the stage stopped mid-sentence. The crowd turned. Edmund stepped forward, reached into his coat, and produced a leather purse that clinked with a sound that made the red-faced man's eyes go very round. "The whole purse," Edmund said. "For the girl. Take it and go." The transaction was completed in under a minute. The drunk man, the girl's father, Edmund would later confirm, with a cold feeling in his chest, snatched the purse and disappeared into the crowd before anyone could say another word. Edmund walked to the stage, and held out his hand to the girl still standing on it. She looked at his hand for a moment. Then she looked up at his face. Her eyes were very dark, nearly black in the grey evening light, and they studied him with the same calm attention that she had been giving to the crowd. There was no fear in them. There was no gratitude either, not yet. There was only a kind of careful watching, as though she were measuring him against some private standard. He remembered that she could not hear him. He spoke anyway, slowly and clearly, because it seemed wrong not to. "You are safe now, girl. I will not hurt you." She blinked. Her face remained a careful, quiet mask. She placed her hand in his and stepped down from the stage. Her name, he would learn from a folded piece of paper tucked into her pocket. The only thing her father had left her was Clara Voss. Age 19. No other information provided. Edmund handed her up into the warm carriage, told his driver to proceed to the solicitor's office, and sat across from her in the dim interior, studying her with growing unease. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the rain streak down the carriage window, her expression perfectly composed. He had acted on impulse. It was unlike him. He was not, as a general rule, a man who acted on impulse. He was a man of order and habit and careful planning, and he had just purchased a person on a wet street corner to spite his aunt, and now the person was sitting across from him dripping quietly onto his good leather seats. "Well," he said, to no one in particular, because she could not hear him anyway. "This was very stupid of me." Clara said nothing. She watched the rain. 2. Ashworth Manor sat on a hill outside the city, surrounded by grounds that were beautiful in summer and merely impressive in all other seasons. It had 22 rooms, a library that smelled of old leather and candle wax, a kitchen garden that the housekeeper tended with religious devotion, and as of the first Wednesday in November, one new housemaid who could not hear a word anyone said to her. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, was skeptical. She communicated her skepticism through her expression, her posture, and the particular way she placed cups down on surfaces, not slamming, but firmly. She showed Clara the linen cupboard, the scullery, the proper way to lay a fire, and the route to the Duke's study, all through pointed gestures and demonstrations. Clara watched each one carefully, and did exactly as she was shown. She was, Mrs. Gable admitted to the cook 2 days later, the most attentive girl she had ever trained. What Mrs. Gable did not know, what no one at Ashworth Manor knew, was that Clara heard every single word that was spoken within 20 feet of her. Her hearing had returned 14 months ago, gradually and then all at once, like a window opening. She had gone to sleep one night, with the world still muffled and silent, and had woken to birdsong so sharp and clear that she had cried from the shock of it. She had not told her father. She had learned very quickly, living in her father's house, that information was currency, and that giving it away freely was how people got hurt. Her silence had been her only protection for 19 years. She saw no reason to surrender it simply because her ears had decided to work again. So she was silent at Ashworth Manor, and she watched, and she listened. She heard Mrs. Gable tell the cook that the Duke had been not right in the head since Lady Ashworth passed. She heard the young footman, Thomas, tell the kitchen maid that his Grace hadn't smiled at a living soul in 2 years. She heard the Duke himself, which was how the trouble started. He talked to himself. Constantly. She had noticed it on the 3rd day, when she was dusting the shelves of the library, and he came in to review some correspondence. He sat down at his desk, opened a letter, and began to read it aloud, not loudly, not to her, simply as though narrating his own life were a necessary habit. "Another letter from Harriet," he muttered. "Suggesting I consider the Pemberton girl. The Pemberton girl is 19 years old and her primary interest is, as far as I can determine, the color of ribbon currently fashionable in London." He set the letter down. "I would rather live alone forever." Clara kept dusting. She kept her face perfectly still. "Though I suppose alone is a generous description," he continued, apparently to the inkwell. "I have 22 servants, one deeply suspicious housekeeper, and a new maid who watches me like I might be dangerous." He paused. "She's probably right." This became the pattern. He spoke. She listened. He had no idea. He told the empty room about his solicitor, Mr. Fitch, who was developing gout in his left foot, and had begun walking with a cane that he swung at things he didn't like, including flower pots, and the Duke's own hunting dogs. He confessed, one grey Thursday afternoon, that he had once cried at a piece of music in church, and had not gone back since, because he was afraid it might happen again. He said his father had been a better man than him, and that he was not entirely sure he disagreed with that assessment. And then there was the knitting. She discovered it by accident on a rainy Friday, when she came to collect his tea tray, and found him sitting with 2 long needles and a ball of dark green wool, working a neat, even row of stitches, with the focus of a man defusing a bomb. He looked up when she entered, and she saw the exact moment he remembered she was deaf. His shoulders dropped back down. "Don't look at me like that," he said to her, even though she was giving him no expression whatsoever. A man is allowed to have hobbies. It is a useful skill. It keeps the hands occupied. He turned back to his knitting. "My mother taught me. I find it calming. And if I hear one word from any living creature about it, I will have that creature dismissed immediately. So it is fortunate that you cannot hear me saying this." Clara picked up the tea tray. She walked back to the kitchen with her face very carefully neutral, and she stood at the sink for a full minute before she allowed herself to breathe properly. She was falling in love with him. She had known it for about a week, and had been trying very hard to unknow it, because she was a girl bought off a stage in the rain, and he was a duke, and there was exactly no version of the world in which that ended well. But he was so entirely different in private from what he was in company. In company he was silent and cold and looked at people the way a man looks at an overcast sky, without expectation. In private he was funny, self-aware, quietly sad, and genuinely uncertain, which was the most human thing she had seen in a long time. The knitting, in particular, was destroying her. She was thinking about all of this one afternoon in November, when he came into the room where she was working, clearly agitated. He had just returned from an afternoon ride, and he paced the length of the room 3 times, before apparently deciding that it was fine to speak. "My aunt is coming next week," he announced to the fireplace. "She has decided that I am lonely, which I am, but I do not require her assistance in addressing it." He turned on his heel. "She will bring 3 eligible women with her. I will be expected to be charming. I am not charming. I have never been charming. My mother used to say I had the social warmth of a November fog, and she was, I think, being kind." He stopped pacing and looked directly at Clara. She kept her eyes carefully unfocused, aimed at a point just past his shoulder. "If only you could hear how much I've come to enjoy your company, little mouse," he said. He said it quietly, like a thought escaping through a crack. "I might actually have to marry you just to keep my secrets safe." Clara's hand tightened on the cloth she was holding. The vase on the side table was very close to the edge. She moved her hand away from it very slowly and very deliberately, because dropping it right now would be a catastrophic mistake in ways she was not yet ready to deal with. Her face was, she was almost certain, the color of a brick. He had already turned back to the fireplace. He didn't see it. 3. Lady Harriet Ashworth arrived on a Monday with 2 trunks, a personal maid, and 3 young women whom she introduced with the particular energy of a woman who believes she is solving a problem that the problem has not yet agreed to have. Miss Dunmore was fair-haired and quiet. Miss Aldridge talked constantly about London. Miss Pemberton, the same Miss Pemberton from the letter, wore lavender and had strong opinions about furniture arrangement. The Duke received them in the front drawing-room, with the expression of a man attending his own execution, and Clara served the tea. She had been doing her best to be invisible since the guests arrived, which was easy enough. People like Miss Aldridge and Miss Pemberton did not look at servants, and when they did, they looked past them. Clara moved through the rooms like weather, present, unnoticed, constant. It was on Wednesday afternoon that the trouble found her. She was carrying a stack of freshly laundered table linens down the upstairs corridor, when she heard Miss Aldridge and Miss Pemberton in the small sitting room, door ajar. Their voices were light and bright and carried perfectly. The deaf girl, Miss Aldridge, was saying, "Did you see her at dinner last night? Standing right behind Ashworth's chair, just staring." "Poor creature," Miss Pemberton said, in a tone that meant the opposite. "I suppose someone has to feel charitable about such things. She's rather pretty, though. In a plain sort of way. Edmund must have a soft heart somewhere under all that frost." A pause, a laugh. Or perhaps he just wanted something obedient. Clara stood still in the corridor. She had spent 19 years being discussed at close range by people who thought she couldn't hear them, and she knew how to hold her face during it. She could do this. She had always been able to do this. The Duke's voice came from around the corner, from the top of the stairs. He must have been walking up from the library. "Miss Aldridge." "Miss Pemberton." "Your Grace." Miss Pemberton's voice went bright. "We were just speaking about your little maid." "So I gathered." His tone was perfectly even. "She is carrying linens, and does not require commentary." "Oh, but she can't hear us," Miss Aldridge said. "I only meant—" "I am aware of what you meant." A brief silence. "You should come down to the drawing room. My aunt is asking for you." Clara heard footsteps, the young women leaving, their voices fading. Then, a different set of footsteps, slower, and then the Duke's voice again, close now, just around the corner from where she stood. He was speaking to himself again. He didn't know she was there. "Hush," he said quietly, to no one, perhaps to himself. "She can't hear your venom, though your perfume is likely enough to knock her over." Clara almost smiled. She didn't. She turned and walked the other way, and she kept her face still, and she folded the linens in the cupboard with very great care and attention. That night, the household settled into its late evening quiet. The guests retired. Lady Harriet retired. The footman banked the fires and the cook went to bed, and eventually the only light left burning was in the library, where the Duke sat reading, as he always did, long after everyone else was asleep. Clara was supposed to be asleep too. She had meant to be asleep. But she had come down for a glass of water from the kitchen, and she was crossing the entrance hall when she heard, through the library door, which was not quite fully closed, the sound of something hitting the floor. Then the Duke's voice, short and sharp. "Blast." She pushed the door open. He was standing over a fallen decanter of brandy, the dark liquid spreading quickly across the Persian rug beside the reading chair. He was holding the neck of the decanter in one hand and looking at the stain with the particular expression of a man who has had a long week and does not need this. Clara did not think about it. She had been not thinking about things for 19 years. "Oh, do be careful, Your Grace," she said. "That rug is from Persia." The silence that followed was the most complete silence she had ever heard. The Duke turned very slowly. He looked at her standing in the doorway in her plain grey nightgown, with her dark hair loose over her shoulders. He looked at her for a long time. She looked back at him. "You can hear," he said. It was not a question. Clara set down her glass of water on the small table just inside the door. She had gone over this moment in her mind more than once in the past weeks, had imagined what she would say, how she would explain, what expression she would wear. But now that it was here, standing in front of her in the candlelit library, with brandy soaking into a Persian rug, she found that she had nothing prepared at all. "Yes," she said. "I can hear." 4. He was not angry. That surprised her. She had expected anger, the cold, controlled kind, the kind that lived behind his grey eyes when he looked at people who disappointed him. She had prepared for it. She had been preparing for it, in some distant part of her mind, since the moment the words left her mouth. Instead, he crossed to the writing desk, set down the neck of the decanter, and stood with his back to her for a moment. Then he turned and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Sit down," he said. She sat in the smaller of the two chairs. He remained standing. He ran one hand through his hair, which was the most disheveled she had ever seen him, and then he said, "How long?" 14 months, Clara said. "My hearing came back a year before you, before Harbour Lane. It returned on its own. It does, sometimes. With the kind of deafness I had." She kept her hands folded in her lap. "I woke up one morning and could hear the birds." He was quiet for a moment. "And you kept the secret?" "I kept it from my father first," she said. "Because if he knew, he would have," she stopped. "He would have found ways to use it. He used everything. And then..." She lifted her eyes to his. "And then I was on a stage in the rain and a man bought me, and I didn't know what kind of man he was yet." He sat down then, not in the large chair, but on the edge of the reading table, which was informal enough that it seemed deliberate. He looked at her steadily. And then I learned what kind of man he was," Clara said. "When he thought no one was listening." The fire crackled. The candles on the desk threw long shadows across the bookshelves. Edmund Ashworth looked at the woman sitting across from him, the woman who had listened to his thoughts for 6 weeks, who had heard about Mr. Fitzgout and his mother and the time he cried in church, and he said nothing for a long moment. Then, very quietly, the knitting. "Yes," Clara said. "The knitting." A muscle moved in his jaw. "You heard all of it." "All of it." He stood up abruptly and went to the window. Outside, the grounds of Ashworth Manor were dark and cold, the bare trees just visible against a clouded sky. Clara watched his back and waited. "You could have told me," he said to the window. "When?" she asked. "The first day. Before I knew if you were kind. Before I knew if keeping silent was safer than speaking." He didn't answer that. "I kept your secrets," Clara said. "I have kept them every day. I will keep them until I die if that is what is required of me." Her voice stayed level. "I never laughed at you. I never told anyone. I listened because she stopped. Started again. Because you were worth listening to." He turned from the window. She met his eyes and did not look away. He stared at her for a long moment, and then something in his face shifted, not softened exactly, but opened, the way a locked room opens when someone finally finds the key. "You heard what I said," he said. "In the sitting room. About keeping your company." Her face was warm. "Yes. And you said nothing. You thought you were talking to yourself." "I was talking to myself," he said. "I talk to myself constantly. It's a terrible habit." He paused. "I said I might marry you." "You said you might have to," Clara said carefully. "To keep your secrets." It was not exactly a declaration. "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." He was quiet again. Then he crossed to the writing desk and picked up the full brandy decanter, the one that hadn't fallen, and poured 2 small glasses, which was not something a duke was supposed to offer to a housemaid, and held one out to her. She took it because refusing seemed more complicated. He sat back down in the large chair and studied her over the rim of his glass. "You know more about me than any person alive," he said. "I know what you told the room," Clara said. "There may be more. There is very little more." He drank. I am not a complicated man. I am simply a private one, and apparently privacy is not something I am capable of maintaining in front of a good listener. She almost smiled. She kept it small. I owe you an explanation, she said. I know that. And I owe you the choice of what to do with me now. I won't pretend otherwise. What do you think I should do with you? I don't know, she said honestly. I am not useful as a secret keeper anymore, since you know I can hear. I am still useful as a housemaid if you're willing to overlook the deception. Or you can send me away, which is entirely your right. He looked at her for a long time. You heard me say, he said slowly, that a woman who listened to my soul while I thought I was talking to the wind was worth something. Clara was very still. You haven't said that yet. No, he agreed. But I'm saying it now. He turned his glass in his hands. You know about the knitting. I do. And the crying in church. Yes. And the fact that I find my own solicitor profoundly irritating. You find him about as useful as a weather vane in a hurricane. Those were your exact words. He let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Right? He looked up at her. And you're still here. I'm still here, Clara said. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees. The fire settled. Somewhere upstairs, Lady Harriet was asleep, dreaming, no doubt, of a successful engagement between her nephew and someone appropriate. Go to bed, the Duke said, finally. We will talk tomorrow. Don't tell anyone what was said in this room. I never do, Clara said. She stood, set down her glass, and walked to the door. Just before she left, she heard him say, quietly, to himself or to her, she wasn't sure which, I don't think I want to send you away, little mouse. She walked up the stairs with both hands pressed flat against her sides. 5. Lady Harriet announced at breakfast Thursday morning that she had been giving the matter serious thought, and had concluded that the Duke's best option was Miss Pemberton, who had good blood, a reasonable fortune, and had agreed. Lady Harriet said this as though it were a selling point, to redecorate the East Wing in whatever style His Grace preferred. The Duke said nothing. He ate his eggs. Miss Pemberton smiled at him over the rim of her teacup. Miss Aldridge discussed the color of her new gloves. Miss Dunmore, the quiet one, looked out the window with the expression of a woman thinking about somewhere else. Clara served the toast. She kept her face still. She had kept her face still for 19 years, and she could do it for one more breakfast. The Duke caught her eye once, briefly, and looked away. She looked away too. After breakfast, the ladies took to the drawing room with embroidery and conversation. The Duke escaped to the stables. Clara was clearing the breakfast table when Lady Harriet came back through the dining room and stopped. She looked at Clara for a moment, really looked, the way she hadn't before. You, she said. Come here. Clara walked forward and stood with her hands at her sides, her face politely attentive, her eyes aimed at Lady Harriet's chin. Lady Harriet was a small woman with sharp eyes and the particular confidence of someone who has always been right. She looked Clara up and down with the frankness of a woman who considered this her right, and everyone else's obligation. My nephew watches you, Lady Harriet said. Don't bother pretending you don't know that. Clara said nothing. She was good at saying nothing. You're a bought girl from a street auction, Lady Harriet continued. Whatever you think is happening here, it isn't. He's a duke. He has responsibilities. His estate, his tenants, his family name, do you understand what that means? Clara understood exactly what it meant. I'm going to speak to him today, Lady Harriet said. I'm going to remind him that whatever charitable impulse brought you into this house, it cannot be allowed to, she paused, searching for the right word. Complicate things. Clara nodded politely and picked up the toast rack. She found the Duke in the library an hour later. He was standing at the window again, which she had come to understand was his thinking position. She knocked on the open door and he turned. "My aunt spoke to you," he said. "It wasn't a question." "She did." "What did she say?" "That you have responsibilities. That your estate and your family name require an appropriate match." Clara set down the small pot of fresh ink she had brought as an excuse to knock. She wasn't wrong. He looked at her sharply. "I'm not asking whether she was wrong. I know." He crossed the room in 5 strides and stopped 2 feet away from her, close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been thinking hard and had arrived somewhere uncomfortable. "I spoke to Mr. Fitch this morning," he said. "I asked him about the legality of the transaction in Harbour Lane. He says it was not a legal sale. Human beings cannot be legally sold in England. Which means you are not my property. You never were." He paused. "Which means you are free to leave whenever you wish." Clara looked at him carefully. "Is that what you want?" "No," he said. He said it without hesitation, which she had not expected. "It is not what I want." Downstairs, she could hear Lady Harriet's voice, rising and falling with particular purpose. She could hear Miss Pemberton laughing at something Miss Aldridge had said. She could hear the whole ordinary machinery of a household doing what households did, unaware that upstairs in the library something was changing. "I want you to stay," Edmund said. "Not as a housemaid." He stopped. Seemed to be choosing words with unusual care. "I said, the night in this room, that a woman who listened to a man's soul while he thought he was talking to the wind was worth something." He looked at her steadily. "I meant it as a general observation. I have since realized it was not general at all." Clara did not look away. "You should know," she said, "that I am not staying for the house or the position. I need to say that clearly." "I know that," he said. "I stayed because," she stopped. Tried again. "In my father's house, silence was a cage. Here it was something I chose. Because I wanted to know who you were. The real version." She looked at her hands, then back at his face. "And the real version was better than I expected." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, you heard me say I enjoyed your company." "Yes." "I was not speaking to myself." She looked up at him. "I knew you could hear," he said. "I suspected it for 2 weeks before the brandy. The way you moved before I spoke in a room, not after. The way you," he stopped. A ghost of something moved across his face that was not quite a smile. "I was hoping you'd slip." Clara stared at him. "You knew." "I suspected." He was quiet. "And I kept talking because," he exhaled. "Because it was the only honest conversation I had had in 2 years, even if only one of us was speaking." For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then the library door opened and Lady Harriet walked in. She stopped when she saw them standing close together. Her eyes moved between them with quick, experienced intelligence, and her expression sharpened. "Edmund," she said. "I think it is time we discussed." "I agree," the Duke said. He did not move. "It is past time." He turned to face his aunt fully. "Clara Voss is not leaving Ashworth Manor. Edmund. She has more intelligence, more integrity, and more genuine character than anyone you have brought to this house." His voice was completely level. "She has kept my confidence without being asked to. She has treated this household and every person in it with more care than they deserved. And he paused. I intend to marry her, if she will have me. Which is her choice, not mine, and certainly not yours." The silence in the library was very loud. Clara looked at him. He looked back at her, and there was something in his face that was not the Iron Duke of anyone's description. It was simply a man, waiting. You kept talking, she said quietly. Even when you suspected. Yes. Because you wanted to be known. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Lady Harriet made a sound that conveyed 17 distinct objections in a single breath. She's a bought girl from. She is Clara Voss, the Duke said, without looking at his aunt. And I am asking her a question. Clara was quiet for a moment. She thought about the stage in the rain, and the carriage, and the first morning in this house, when she had laid the library fire and heard him come in muttering about his correspondence. She thought about the knitting, the dark green wool, the even rows of stitches, the way he had said it keeps the hands occupied, as though she couldn't see perfectly well that it also kept the sadness occupied. She thought about being known. Yes, she said. Lady Harriet left the room with great dignity, and considerably less victory than she had entered with. Her footsteps down the corridor were precise and communicative. The Duke, Edmund, stood in the library and looked at Clara with the expression of a man who has just made the best decision of his life and knows it. You should know, he said, after a moment, that the knitting is non-negotiable. I know, Clara said. And I will continue to talk to myself in empty rooms. They won't be empty anymore. Something crossed his face that was, unmistakably, a smile. It changed him entirely, softened the sharp lines, warmed the grey eyes, made him look suddenly like the man she had been listening to for 6 weeks, the private one, the real one. No, he said. I suppose they won't. That evening, after the guests had departed, Miss Pemberton in tight-lipped silence, Miss Aldridge in bright, gossipy fascination, Miss Dunmore with what looked remarkably like relief, Edmund sat in the large chair by the library fire with his knitting and Clara sat in the smaller one with a book. He worked through half a row before he said, I'm purling too loosely again. Clara looked up. She looked at his hands. You're holding the left needle too far back. Move your thumb forward. He adjusted. Tried again. Nodded once. They sat by the fire in the quiet house, and outside the wind moved in the trees, and the candles burned, and for the first time in a very long time, the silence at Ashworth Manor was the comfortable kind,